and she is Dr. Jeanine Canty. She is a faculty at Naropa University teaching in the environmental studies and leadership programs. Her work intersects issues of social and ecological justice, and she is very interested in the process individuals go through to reach heightened awareness and translating this to positive change. She has presented and facilitated workshops at many local conscious events, including Denver Green Festival, Colorado Pioneers, Wilderness Therapy Symposium, and the Rocky Mountain Sustainability Summit, as well as national and international values. I introduce to you all Dr. Jeanine Canty.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for so many people coming. There's some seats up here and some comfy ones over there if anyone wants to move up. As you just heard, I teach at Naropa University, and I've been there for about 8 years. And I teach in areas such as ecopsychology, environmental justice, indigenous environmental issues, field courses, all sorts of things. And much of my passion is around looking at the intersection between race and oppression and environmental issues and those connections. They're really important for me. And one of the assumptions that I'm bringing to this talk and all of my work is that they go hand in hand. So I was really honored to be invited to speak here because it's something that I'm passionate about, and it's something I feel like I know a little bit about as well. And so I definitely love working with the earth, growing food. I wouldn't call myself a food justice activist. But what I'm going to talk about today is really about the patterns that create food injustice. And I was here this morning and it felt like we went into a lot of topics with a lot of spaciousness, which for those of you who know about Naropa, we're a Buddhist-inspired contemplative school, so we've like a lot of space. But right now I'm going to actually get into it. And the point of it isn't to bring up guilt or shame or jump to solutions, but it's really about storytelling and looking at how these issues are affecting us. I used to work at another school, and some of the students were working around wilderness therapy, and they'd come to me and they'd say, my dream is to go take inner city kids to the wilderness, which is a really wonderful altruistic piece, but I felt like in the curriculum there was nothing saying how someone becomes an inner city dweller. And I think Norma, who's back there, hi Norma, we were talking in the last session about some of the assumptions that come with food justice and food justice workers and green jobs. Sometimes people don't know the patterns that created all of this. So it can feel more like almost a missionary model rather than really knowing the ins and outs of situations. And so if we're really going to live in a beloved community, we need to know the stories of the beloved people in our community. And so I am going to go through some sweeping patterns really quickly. And before I start, at Naropa we have a tradition called the bow, and it's not a religious culty thing. It's just a way of honoring everyone in the room. And so it's optional, but it's really just bowing down and back. And so I invite you to take a deep breath and join in a bow. I always look like it's hard not to smile once you bow too, so it's just good. And just another thing, I am originally from New York, so I have a twisted sense of humor and cutting edges. So if they cut you or anything, know I also come from a place of love and compassion. And I am using, some of my students are here, they're kind of like, oh, she never does PowerPoints, but I did do one today, and I'm going to be all in your space working it. And yeah, so the title of my session is The Historical Structures of Food Insecurity. And it's saying that this talk is going to frame patterns of injustice for marginalized communities within the U.S. and how this sets the foundation for structural inequalities that create food injustice. And so right there's lots of assumptions, and I just want to touch upon a few of them. And the first, which I've already said, is that ecological oppression and the oppression of people go hand in hand. And even deeper than that is that you can take any large-scale pattern of racism, and it's always tied to the acquisition of natural resources. So sometimes we're learning about racism and we're talking about like good and bad people, and there's all this guilt, blah, blah, instead of like if we actually unravel that all of this is about social structures and inequities that put certain people on the bottom so they can work the land, they can work menial jobs, all of these things are about racism and acquisition of natural resources. They're not about good and bad. Another assumption is what food justice is, and there's various definitions. Here I said food justice is a community's right to have healthy, affordable, local, culturally relevant food, and the food justice movement comes out of the environmental justice movement. And how many people know a little bit about environmental justice? So about half of the room, that is great. And this is another topic that I'm really passionate about. And environmental justice is really saying that marginalized communities disproportionately bear the burden of ecological issues, environmental issues, and marginalized peoples are indigenous peoples, people of color, the working class, the poor, women and children. And in this, so those communities have less power, political and economic power, to push those things out of their communities and address them. And so, these things do go hand in hand. And so within this presentation, I'm going to focus on 4 specific communities, some more than others. And there's a academic social justice activist named Frederick Yeo, and he talks about caste-like immigrants, and they're the cultural groups that did not choose to come to the U.S. So that's Native Americans, because they were already here, right? And then most African Americans, they were forcibly brought here against their will, and the descendants of African Americans. And there's some exceptions. And then many, and I went back and forth with this, whether to say Latina Americans or Mexican Americans. He specifically says Mexican Americans, and that's particularly because, again, a lot of us live in places that were actually Mexico, and Mexican people lived in definitely the Southwest in different areas, and so they were native to this land. When we broaden it with food justice to be Latina, it's a whole nother spectrum, but it actually follows a lot of the same patterns. But for today's intent, I'm going to focus on Mexican Americans. And then he doesn't, but I feel it's important to bring in, is Asian Americans. Kind of a not as well-known history within our country is that a lot of Asian Americans didn't willfully come here, they were actually forced here. And there's varying degrees, but looking at some of the beginnings of this country, and definitely in the 1800s, and looking at some of those patterns. So I'm going to touch slightly upon that. So we're on the same page, but okay, great. And then the father of environmental justice is a man named Robert Bullard. The mother is actually a woman named, does anyone in this room know? Hazel Johnson, and she's pretty amazing, and she's deceased. But Robert Bullard brings up patterns for marginalized groups that happen with what he would call environmental racism. And It starts